I've discovered something remarkable about successful people throughout my years of studying human achievement, and it's not at all what most people expect. It's not their education, though that helps. It's not their connections, though those matter. It's not even their talent or their timing. No, the real secret that separates those who achieve their dreams from those who merely talk about them is something far more subtle, far more powerful, and frankly, far more difficult to master. It's their ability to keep silent. Now, I know that sounds almost backwards in our world today, doesn't it? We live in a time when everyone's talking, everyone's sharing, everyone's broadcasting their every thought and plan to anyone who'll listen. Social media has made us believe that if we're not announcing our intentions, if we're not declaring our goals to the world, somehow they're not real. But I'm here to tell you something that might save your dreams, might save your future, and might completely transform your life. The most dangerous thing you can do when you have a goal, when you have a dream, when you have something precious growing inside your mind, is to talk about it prematurely. This isn't my idea. This is ancient wisdom that Napoleon Hill discovered when he spent 20 years studying the 500 most successful people in America. This is something that every truly successful person I've ever known has understood, even if they couldn't quite put it into words. And today, I'm going to explain to you exactly why your silence, your ability to keep your mouth shut about your dreams until the right time, is quite literally the difference between success and failure. Think about this for a moment. When you get an idea, a real idea that excites you, that makes your heart beat faster, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to tell someone, don't you? You want to share it. You want to see their reaction. You want their approval, their excitement, their validation. It's completely natural. We're social creatures. We want to connect. We want to be understood. We want to be encouraged. But here's what I've learned, and here's what I need you to understand with every fiber of your being. The moment you share that dream prematurely, you begin to kill it. Now, why would that be? Why would simply talking about something damage it? Well, let me explain this in a way that makes perfect sense. You see, when you conceive of an idea, when you get inspired about a goal or a dream, something remarkable happens in your mind. That idea is like a seed that's just been planted in fertile soil. It's fragile, it's vulnerable, it needs protection. It needs the right conditions to germinate, to develop roots, to grow strong enough to break through the surface. And what does a farmer do with a precious seed? He buries it. He covers it. He protects it from the birds that would eat it, from the sun that would dry it out before it can sprout, from the wind that would blow it away. He keeps it hidden in the darkness where it can do its secret work of transformation. Your dream, your goal, your idea, it's exactly like that seed. In the beginning, it needs darkness. It needs silence. It needs protection. It needs time to develop roots in your subconscious mind, to gather strength, to become substantial enough to withstand the harsh light of other people's opinions, doubts, and well-meaning but dream-killing advice. Think about what happens when you tell someone about your dream. Maybe it's at a dinner party or over coffee with a friend. You share your vision with enthusiasm, your eyes bright with possibility. And then comes the response. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it's wrapped in concern. Oh, that sounds interesting, but have you thought about? And then comes the flood, the statistics, the stories of failure, the reasons why it won't work, the market conditions, the economy, your age, your lack of experience, your too much experience, the competition, the risk. And here's what's insidious about it. They mean well. They're not trying to destroy your dream. They're trying to protect you. They're trying to save you from disappointment, from failure, from looking foolish. But protection from failure is also protection from success. You cannot have one without risking the other. Every single person who has achieved something remarkable has had to face this gauntlet of doubt. Walt Disney was told he lacked imagination. The Beatles were rejected by record label after record label. Publishers told J.K. Rowling that children's books about wizards wouldn't sell. But here's the critical difference. These people had already spent time in silence with their dreams. By the time they faced the critics and the doubters, their dreams had roots, deep roots, roots that went down into their subconscious mind so deep that no amount of surface criticism could uproot them. When your dream is still new, still fragile, it has no such roots. It's all green shoot and tender leaf. One frost of criticism and it withers. One harsh word and it retreats back into the soil of your mind, never to emerge again, and you'll tell yourself it wasn't a real dream anyway. You'll rationalize. You'll say you were being unrealistic, you'll say you were just fantasizing, but the truth is you didn't give your dream the one thing it needed most: time to grow in silence. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but don't I need feedback? Don't I need to test my ideas? Don't I need to know if it's viable? Yes, eventually. But there's a vast difference between seeking expert counsel when you're ready and casually exposing your infant dream to anyone who'll listen. There's a difference between strategic consultation and validation seeking. One comes from strength, the other from weakness. When your dream has had time to develop, when you've thought it through, when you've made plans, when you've taken the first steps, when you've proven to yourself that you're serious, then you seek out specific people with specific expertise. You don't announce it to the crowd, you consult with the wise. You find mentors who've walked the path. You locate experts who can help you avoid pitfalls. But you do this from a position of commitment, not from a position of, "What do you think?" You're not seeking permission, you're seeking information. There's another reason silence is so powerful. It forces you to rely on yourself. When you keep your dream quiet, you can't use other people's enthusiasm as fuel. You can't feed off their encouragement. You become self-reliant. You develop your own internal fire. And that's exactly what you need, because here's the truth. On the long road to achievement, there will be days when nobody's cheering. There will be mornings when you wake up, and the work seems impossibly hard. There will be setbacks that make you question everything. If you've been running on other people's praise and approval, what happens when that runs out? What happens when they get bored with your dream? What happens when they move on to the next thing, the next person, the next excitement? You collapse, because you built your foundation on sand. But when you keep silent, when you learn to draw strength from within, you build something unshakable. You learn to motivate yourself. You learn to pick yourself up when you fall. You learn that the only approval you really need is the knowledge that you're doing the work, that you're moving forward, that you're becoming the person capable of achieving that dream. This is what separates those who talk from those who do. The talkers need an audience, the doers need only a mirror. Now, I want to address something important. Keeping silent doesn't mean you're alone. It doesn't mean you can't have mentors, advisors, or trusted friends who support you. There's a difference between strategic counsel and social broadcasting. When you're building something real, you might need specific help. A lawyer to review a contract, a mentor who's walked the path before you, a partner who brings skills you lack. These people serve a function. You're not telling them your dream for validation, you're engaging them for collaboration or expertise. But even here, be selective, be protective. Share only what's necessary, only with those who've earned your trust, and only when it serves the work itself. I've watched people ruin perfectly good business partnerships by bringing in too many voices too soon. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone thinks they know better. And suddenly, the dream that was clear in your mind becomes a committee project, watered down, compromised, reshaped until it's unrecognizable. Your dream came to you for a reason. It chose you. And while you can refine it, improve it, and adapt it as you learn, you must protect its essence. Silence helps you do that. There's also this: when you talk too much, you invite problems you don't need. You invite competition. You invite people who might steal your ideas. You invite jealousy and sabotage from those who resent your ambition. I'm not saying the world is full of thieves and villains. Most people are decent, but human nature is complex. Someone might hear your idea and, without even realizing it, start pursuing something similar, not out of malice, but because you planted a seed in their mind. Is that fair? Maybe not. Does it matter? No. What matters is protecting what's yours until it's strong enough to stand in the open. Think of a seed again. When it's underground, it's safe. It's hidden from birds that would eat it, from feet that would crush it, from weather that would kill it. But once it breaks through the soil, once it has roots and a stem, it can withstand exposure. It's ready for the world. Your dream is the same. In the beginning, it needs protection. It needs the darkness and silence of your private commitment. But there will come a bajide time when it's ready to emerge. When the work is done, or well underway, When you have something real to show, not just something exciting to say, that's when your voice matters. That's when sharing serves a purpose. And here's something most people never consider: the quality of your silence. What you don't share often says more about your character than what you do. I know a man, a craftsman, who spent 3 years developing a new technique for woodworking. 3 years. And during that entire time, he told almost no one what he was working on. Not because he was secretive or antisocial, but because he understood something profound. Premature exposure dilutes potency. When he finally revealed his work, it wasn't an announcement. It was a demonstration. And the response wasn't polite interest or casual likes on a screen. It was awe. It was respect. It was people who immediately wanted to learn from him, to work with him, to support what he was doing, because he had earned the right to their attention. That's the pattern you see repeated throughout history. The people who changed the world weren't the ones constantly updating everyone on their progress. They were the ones working while others were talking, building while others were broadcasting, creating while others were consuming. Think about the great achievements in human history: the airplane, the light bulb, the personal computer. None of these came from people who spent half their time telling the world what they were going to do. They came from people who disappeared into their work and emerged with something that changed everything. Now, I'm not saying you should never share your journey. That's not the point at all. There's tremendous value in documenting your process, in teaching what you're learning, in building connections with others on a similar path. But there's a massive difference between sharing from a place of service and sharing from a place of validation seeking. One builds, the other depletes. When you share because you have something valuable to offer, something that might help someone else avoid a mistake you made or accelerate their own progress, that's contribution. That's adding value to the world. But when you share because you need someone to tell you you're on the right track, because you need external confirmation before you can believe in what you're doing, that's consumption disguised as contribution. And your subconscious mind knows the difference, even when your conscious mind doesn't want to admit it. Here's a practical test. Before you share something about what you're working on, ask yourself one simple question: who is this really for? If the honest answer is for me, because I need encouragement, or for me because I want people to think I'm impressive, then wait. That doesn't mean your need for encouragement isn't valid. It absolutely is. But seek it from the right sources: a mentor, a trusted friend, someone who's where you want to be. Not from the crowd, not from strangers, not from people who will give you a like and forget about you 30 seconds later. But if the answer is, for someone who's struggling with what I struggled with, or to demonstrate what's actually possible, then by all means, share. Share generously. Share specifically. Share with the intention to serve. The irony is that when you share less frequently but with more substance, people pay more attention. When every post isn't an announcement or an update or a request for validation, the posts you do make carry weight. Your words become signals, not noise. Your presence becomes something people feel rather than something they scroll past. And that's a completely different kind of influence. I think about the artists whose work I've followed for years. The ones who disappear for months, then return with something that makes me stop and think for days. Compare that to the artists who post sketches, behind-the-scenes shots, work-in-progress updates, polls about which color palette to use, stories about their coffee routine, and finished pieces all in the same week. Both might be equally talented, but one haunts me. The other just exists in my feed. The same principle applies to how you show up in conversations, in relationships, in your own mind. When you're not constantly reporting your internal weather to everyone around you, when you're not outsourcing your emotional processing to an audience, something interesting happens. You develop an internal authority. You become the first person you check in with, not the last. This is where the real transformation occurs. Most people are operating from a place of constant feedback seeking. They have a thought, and before they've fully formed their own opinion about it, they're already asking others what they think. They have an experience, and before they've processed what it meant to times them asterisk, they're already crafting how to present it to others. The external validation loop becomes so automatic that they've essentially outsourced their sense of reality. When you step back from oversharing, you're forced to sit with yourself in a way that most people actively avoid. You have an emotion, And instead of immediately posting about it or texting 3 people about it or analyzing it aloud, you just feel it. You notice it. You let it move through you. And in that space between experience and expression, something forms, your own relationship with your own life. This isn't about becoming cold or detached or unreachable. It's about becoming solid, grounded, present in your own experience before you make it into content for someone else's consumption. I've watched people go through breakups on social media, the cryptic posts, the song lyrics, the just focusing on myself captions, the photos clearly designed to show the ex what they're missing. Then I've watched other people go through breakups in silence. Months later, you see them, again, and there's something different in their eyes. A depth, a quiet confidence. They processed something real without an audience, and it changed them in ways that performing grief never could. The person who shares everything thinks they're being authentic, but authenticity isn't the same as transparency. Real authenticity is knowing yourself so well that you can choose what to reveal and what to keep sacred. It's having a rich internal life that doesn't require external validation to feel real. Here's what I've noticed about people who've mastered the art of selective sharing. They're phenomenal listeners. Because they're not constantly waiting for their turn to talk about themselves, they can actually hear what others are saying. They ask better questions. They notice details. They're present in a way that people who are always half composing their next post never quite manage. They also develop better judgment. When you're in the habit of immediately externalizing every thought and feeling, you never build the muscle of discernment. You don't learn to ask, is this true? Is this important? Is this mine to share? You just release everything and let the audience sort it out. But when you create space between experience and expression, you start to notice patterns. You realize that the thing that felt catastrophic on Tuesday feels manageable by Thursday. You see that the brilliant insight you had at midnight sounds pretty ordinary in the morning light. You develop a filter, not based on what others might think, but based on what actually matters to you. You stop reacting to everything and start responding to what deserves your attention. And here's where something remarkable happens. When you remove the performance anxiety, when you stop broadcasting every thought and feeling, you actually become more creative, more original. Because creativity doesn't happen on stage. It happens in the quiet moments when you're not worried about the audience. Think about the writers, the artists, the innovators who've created work that changed the world. Almost universally, they talk about the need for solitude. For long stretches of time where nobody's watching, nobody's commenting, nobody's judging, that's not coincidence, that's requirement. Your brain needs privacy to explore ideas that might not work, to follow threads that might lead nowhere, to make connections that seem absurd at first. You can't do that when you're constantly checking to see how it's playing to the crowd. I've watched people kill their own creativity by exposing it too early. They get an idea, they share it immediately, and then they're stuck. Because now they're committed to that first draft, that half-formed thought, in a public way. They've announced it, they've gotten reactions to it, and now instead of developing the idea, they're defending it or explaining it or managing other people's responses to it. The thing you create in private can evolve. It can change completely. It can fail spectacularly, and nobody has to know. You can try 17 different versions until you find the one that actually works. But the thing you create in public gets frozen at whatever stage you revealed it. This applies to more than just creative work. It applies to your opinions, your goals, your personal development. When you announce your intention to change, you often get a little hit of accomplishment feeling just from the announcement. Your brain mistakes the declaration for the action. And then, strangely, you're less likely to follow through. There's research on this. When you tell people about your goals, your brain gets some of the satisfaction it was seeking from achieving those goals. The announcement feels like progress. So you've reduced your motivation to actually do the work. But when you keep your intentions private, when you simply start doing the thing without announcing it, something different happens. You build quiet momentum. You rack up small wins that nobody sees. And then one day, people notice. Not because you told them what you were planning to do, but because you actually did it. I'm not suggesting you become secretive or isolated. I'm suggesting you become selective. Share the finished work, not the process. Share the actual achievement, not the intention. Share with the people who've earned access to your inner world, not with everyone who happens to be scrolling by. There's a concept in wisdom traditions called holding something sacred. It means protecting it from casual exposure, keeping it private not because it's shameful, but because it's valuable. Because some things lose their power when they're treated casually or publicly. Your dreams are sacred, your struggles are sacred, your growth is sacred. Not everything needs to be shared. Not everything needs witnesses. And when you live this way, when you claim some privacy, you'll notice something about the people around you. Some will respect it. They'll appreciate that you're not performing for them. They'll value the moments you do choose to share because those moments are genuine, not compulsory. Others won't understand. They'll think you're hiding something. They'll interpret your privacy as secrecy, your boundaries as walls. And that's fine. That tells you something useful about who they are and what they expect from relationships. But here's what you need to understand. Their reaction isn't really about you. It's about what your change represents to them. When you start thinking independently, questioning the narratives everyone else accepts, refusing to participate in the collective anxiety, you become a mirror. And that mirror reflects back something they're not ready to see, that they too have a choice. That's threatening, because if you can choose differently, then so can they. And if they can, but they aren't, then they have to confront why. They have to look at the fear, the conditioning, the comfort of conformity that keeps them where they are. Most people aren't ready for that confrontation, so instead of looking inward, they look at you and decide you're the problem. You'll see this play out in subtle ways. The family member who says they're worried about you. The friend who keeps sending you articles to help you understand what's really going on. The colleague who mentions, just casually, that you've changed, and not in a way that sounds like a compliment. They're not trying to help you. They're trying to pull you back into the fold, back into the comfort zone, where everyone agrees and no one asks difficult questions. And you know what? You can let them. You can decide that fitting in matters more than thinking clearly. You can nod along, bite your tongue, pretend you believe things you don't believe just to keep the peace. Plenty of people make that choice. They decide that social harmony is worth the price of intellectual honesty. I'm not here to tell you they're wrong. Everyone has to decide what they're willing to trade. But if you make that trade, understand what you're giving up. You're giving up the ability to trust your own mind. You're giving up the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you think for yourself. You're giving up the possibility of genuine connection, because if people only accept the version of you that agrees with them, they don't actually accept you at all. There's another option. You can stand quietly in your own truth. You don't have to argue, you don't have to convince anyone, you don't have to prove you're right. You just have to be willing to think your own thoughts and let the consequences be what they are. This is harder than it sounds. Because the pressure to conform isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's a look of disappointment, sometimes it's the slow withdrawal of warmth from someone you care about. Sometimes it's the loneliness of realizing that the connection you thought you had was conditional on agreement. But here's what I've learned, and what you'll learn if you stay this course. The people who can't accept you thinking differently weren't really with you in the first place. They were with a version of you, a projection, an assumption, and when you outgrow that assumption, the relationship doesn't end. It was never real to begin with. The real relationships, the ones built on something deeper than shared opinions, those survive. They might get tested. There might be uncomfortable conversations. But if there's genuine respect underneath, if there's real love or friendship, it bends. It doesn't break. And you'll find something else, something unexpected. When you stop performing agreement, when you stop pretending to believe things you don't believe, you create space for honesty. And in that space, sometimes other people will admit they've been pretending too. They've been going along to get along. They've been afraid to say what they actually think. And when that happens, when real conversation breaks out in a place where everyone's been reading from scripts, it's like oxygen suddenly flooding into a room where people had been slowly suffocating. I've watched this happen at dinner tables, in offices, in community meetings. One person stops performing. One person says what they actually think, not rudely, not aggressively, but honestly. And you can see shoulders relax around the room. You can see people lean in, because everyone was tired of the game. They just didn't think they were allowed to stop playing. This connects to something important about intelligence itself. Real intelligence isn't about sounding smart. It's about thinking clearly and speaking truthfully. But we've created a culture where those two things have become separated, where you can sound incredibly intelligent while saying nothing of substance, where you can use all the right terminology, all the proper frameworks, all the approved language, and be completely divorced from reality. I call this performance intelligence. It's intelligence as theater. You're not trying to solve problems or understand truth. You're trying to signal to an audience that you're the right kind of person with the right kind of thoughts. And here's the trap. Once you get good at performance intelligence, it starts to feel like real thinking. You can construct elaborate arguments, you can defend positions, you can win debates, but you're doing it all within a closed system, a game where the rules have already been decided, where the acceptable conclusions have already been determined. Real thinking is different. Real thinking starts with genuine curiosity, not predetermined conclusions. It follows evidence wherever it leads, not just to comfortable destinations. It's willing to say I don't know when the data is unclear. It's willing to change positions when presented with better information. And this is where courage comes in again. Because real thinking will inevitably lead you to conclusions that don't fit neatly into any approved framework. Real thinking is messy, it's contradictory, it acknowledges complexity and uncertainty. The intellectual posers hate uncertainty. They need everything to fit into their model. If reality doesn't match the theory, they question reality, not the theory. But if you're committed to truth over appearance, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. You have to be comfortable saying this is more complicated than the simple narratives allow. I'm still working through it. I don't have all the answers. That honesty, paradoxically, is a mark of real intelligence, because the world is times complicated. Anyone telling you it's simple is either lying or hasn't thought deeply enough. Here's a test you can apply to your own thinking. Are you willing to articulate the strongest version of arguments you disagree with? Can you state opposing positions so fairly and completely that people holding the positions would say, yes, that's exactly what I believe? If you can't, you probably don't understand the issue as well as you think you do. You're probably operating on caricature and strawman. And that's easy. Knocking down weak versions of opposing arguments always makes you look smart to people who already agree with you. But it's not real thinking. It's just tribalism wearing the costume of reason. The person who's genuinely intelligent can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, understanding the internal logic of each one, even while ultimately choosing one position over another. They grant their opponents dignity and intelligence. They assume good faith until proven otherwise. This is hard. It's much easier to assume everyone who disagrees with you is stupid or evil. But when you approach disagreement with curiosity instead of defensiveness, something remarkable happens. You start to see the invisible walls that separate us for what they really are, constructed beliefs, not natural barriers. I remember watching two neighbors argue about property lines. One insisted on precision, measurements, legal documents. The other spoke about tradition, about how things had always been, about community understanding. Neither was wrong. They were simply speaking different languages of value, one the language of law, the other the language of relationship. The neighbor who understood how to navigate differences did something brilliant. He didn't try to convince the other he was right. Instead, he asked, "What matters most to you in how we resolve this?" And suddenly they weren't arguing about inches of land. They were talking about respect, about feeling heard, about maintaining a good relationship. The property line got settled in an afternoon after weeks of stalemate. Because here's what most people miss about navigating differences. The issue is rarely the real issue. When someone gets heated about politics, they're often expressing fear about their future or their children's future. When they're rigid about rules, they're often seeking safety in a world that feels chaotic. When they seem unreasonable, they're often protecting something they haven't articulated even to themselves. The person who sees this navigates differently. They listen for what's beneath the words. They ask questions that go deeper than the surface disagreement. What concerns you most about this? What would the ideal outcome look like for you? What am I missing in how I'm understanding your perspective? These questions aren't manipulation. They're genuine curiosity, and people can feel the difference. I've watched marriages transform when one partner stops trying to win arguments and starts trying to understand what their spouse is really asking for. I've seen business partnerships survive massive disagreements because someone had the wisdom to say, "We see this differently, and that's okay. Let's find what we agree on and build from there." The people who navigate differences well also know something crucial. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. Some disagreements aren't worth having. Some people aren't ready to meet you with good faith. Some battles would cost more than any victory is worth. Wisdom isn't just knowing how to engage, it's knowing when not to. I watched a man spend 3 years fighting his homeowners association over a fence. He was technically right according to the original bylaws. But the fight cost him thousands in legal fees, countless hours of stress, and poisoned relationships with everyone on his street. He won in court and lost in every way that mattered. Meanwhile, his neighbor faced a similar situation, recognized the fight wasn't worth it, adjusted his plans, and spent those 3 years building friendships instead of resentments. Same situation, dramatically different outcomes. The difference wasn't who was right, it was who understood what actually mattered. The ability to navigate differences is really the ability to keep your eyes on what you're trying to build, not just on being proven right in the moment. It's asking yourself, will winning this argument get me closer to the life I want, or will it just give me the hollow satisfaction of being right? And here's what I've observed about people who do this well, people who really understand the art of navigating differences without destroying what they've built. They have this ability to separate the person from the problem. They can disagree with your idea without making you feel like they're rejecting you as a human being. They've mastered something most people never learn: the difference between challenging a thought and attacking a thinker. I remember working with a man years ago, brilliant engineer, terrible at relationships. Every disagreement with his wife became World War III because he couldn't separate her opinion from her value. If she questioned his decision about money, he heard, "You're a failure as a provider." If she suggested a different approach to parenting, he heard, "You're a terrible father." He was so busy defending himself against attacks that weren't actually happening that he couldn't hear what she was really saying. The tragedy is, she wasn't attacking him at all. She was trying to collaborate with him, but he'd turned every conversation into a courtroom where he was constantly on trial. And you can't build intimacy in a courtroom. You can't build trust when you're always in defense mode. The shift happened when he finally understood this simple truth. His wife disagreeing with him about how to handle their teenager's curfew wasn't a referendum on his worth as a father. It was just two people with different perspectives trying to figure out the best path forward. Once he could see that once he could separate the problem from his identity, everything changed. They could actually talk. They could actually think together instead of just defending their positions. This is what mature people do. They create space between their ego and the discussion. They can hear, "I disagree with your approach," without translating it into, "I think you're worthless." They can say, "I see it differently," without meaning, "You're stupid for seeing it that." Think about the best leader you've ever worked for. I'd bet money that one of their qualities was this: they could hear criticism of their ideas without taking it as a personal assault. They could sit in a meeting, propose something, and when someone said, "I don't think that'll work," they didn't shut down or attack. They got curious. They asked why. They were more interested in finding the best solution than in protecting their ego. That's power. Real power. Not the fragile kind that needs to win every argument, but the solid kind that can afford to be wrong because it's not building its identity on being right all the time. And here's what else these people understand: timing matters. Not every difference needs to be addressed immediately. Not every disagreement needs to be resolved right now. Sometimes, the wisest thing you can do is simply acknowledge the difference and move forward. I've seen relationships saved because someone had the wisdom to say, "You know what, we see this differently. I hear you, you hear me, and we're not going to solve this tonight. Let's table it and come back when we're both fresh." That takes maturity. It takes confidence. It takes the ability to sit with unresolved tension without panicking. Because here's the truth: some differences don't need resolution. Some differences just need acknowledgement. Your wife likes the house warmer than you do. Your business partner is more conservative with money than you are. Your teenager thinks your music is ancient. These aren't problems to solve, they're differences to accommodate. The people who struggle most with disagreement are usually the ones who need certainty. They need everyone to agree because agreement feels like safety. But life doesn't offer that kind of certainty. Life is messy. People are complex. And the sooner you can become comfortable with the fact that intelligent, good-hearted people can see the same situation completely differently, the freer you become. That's when you stop seeing every disagreement as a threat and start seeing it as data. It's not about who's right or wrong anymore. It's about understanding how different minds process the same world. I learned this lesson the hard way during a heated political discussion with an old friend years ago. We were on opposite sides of an issue, and I was absolutely convinced I had the moral high ground. I came armed with facts, statistics, logic, but the more I presented my case, the more defensive he became. And the more defensive he became, the more frustrated I got. Finally, exhausted, I stopped talking and just asked him, "Why does this matter so much to you?" And what he told me next completely reframed everything. He shared a personal experience from his childhood that I knew nothing about. An experience that, when I heard it, made his position not just understandable, but deeply human. I still didn't agree with his conclusion, but I understood why he arrived there. And more importantly, I respected the journey. That's the shift. From "you're wrong" to "I see why you think that." Those 5 words can transform nearly any relationship. But here's what nobody tells you about becoming more open-minded. It doesn't make you weak or indecisive. It actually makes you sharper. Because when you're not busy defending your position at all costs, you're free to evaluate ideas on their merits. You can borrow the best insights from multiple perspectives and craft something better than any single viewpoint could offer. Think about the greatest innovations in history. They almost never came from people who stuck rigidly to one school of thought. They came from polymaths who could synthesize ideas across disciplines. Benjamin Franklin studying electricity and politics, Leonardo da Vinci blending art and engineering, Steve Jobs merging technology with calligraphy and design. Cross-pollination of ideas creates breakthroughs, but that only happens when you're willing to venture outside your intellectual comfort zone. Now, I'm not suggesting you become so open-minded that your brain falls out, as the saying goes. There are principles worth defending, values worth holding firm. But even then, the question isn't whether you hold those values, it's whether you can hold them while still treating people with different values as fully human. Can you believe strongly in something without demonizing those who believe differently? Can you stand firm in your convictions while remaining curious about alternative views? That's the tension mature minds learn to navigate. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more secure you become in your own thinking, the less threatened you feel by other people's thoughts. Weak positions require rigid defense. Strong positions can withstand scrutiny, questioning, even doubt. The people who scream the loudest about how right they are? Often, they're the ones most afraid their foundation might crack under examination. But when you've genuinely wrestled with ideas, tested them, refined them, you're not afraid of challenges. You welcome them. Because you know that if your idea can't survive contact with reality and honest critique, it probably wasn't that good to begin with. This brings me to perhaps the most important aspect of cognitive flexibility, the willingness to change your mind. Not randomly, not easily, but when the evidence genuinely warrants it. Changing your mind isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of growth. It means you're responsive to new information rather than imprisoned by old conclusions. Yet we live in a culture that treats mind-changing as flip-flopping, as inconsistency, as character weakness. That's backwards. The real weakness is learning something new and refusing to adjust. That's not integrity, that's stubbornness masquerading as principle. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. Stubbornness often receives social reinforcement. Your friends might say, "I admire how you stick to your guns." Your family might praise your consistency, but consistency in the wrong direction is just a slow-motion disaster with cheerleaders. I remember a sales manager I knew years ago, brilliant guy, decades of experience. He built his entire career on relationship selling, coffee meetings, handshakes, personal connections. Then the digital revolution arrived. His company introduced CRM systems, email campaigns, social selling, and he dug in his heels. "That's not how real business is done," he insisted. "People buy from people they know and trust, face to face." Was he wrong about relationships mattering? Absolutely not. Was he wrong about refusing to adapt his methods? Completely. Within 3 years, younger salespeople using digital tools were outperforming him by enormous margins, not because they were better at relationships, but because they could build more relationships faster. They could stay in touch more efficiently. They could provide value at scale. He eventually left the company, bitter, convinced the world had lost its way. But the world hadn't lost anything. It had simply added new tools to accomplish the same eternal goal, building trust and providing value. He mistook the vehicle for the destination. This happens everywhere. The journalist who refuses to learn multimedia storytelling because real journalism is print. The teacher who resists educational technology because students need human connection. The musician who dismisses streaming services because physical albums have souls. In every case, they're defending something real: craft, connection, artistry. But they're defending it by refusing the very tools that could extend its reach and relevance. They're saving the village by letting it burn. Now, let me address something crucial. I'm not suggesting you abandon your core values every time the wind shifts. That would be equally foolish. What I'm talking about is wisdom, the ability to distinguish between principles worth preserving and methods worth questioning. Your principles might be: deliver excellent work, treat people with respect, maintain ethical standards. Those should remain constant. But your methods, how you communicate, which tools you use, how you structure your time, those should be perpetually up for evaluation. Think of it like navigation. Your destination doesn't change just because you acquire better maps or faster vehicles. But insisting on using a compass and horse when GPS and cars are available, that's not faithfulness to your journey. That's romantic attachment to difficulty. The strongest people I've ever known had this quality. They held certain things sacred while remaining ruthlessly practical about everything else. They knew what mattered and what was merely familiar. They could adopt new strategies without losing their identity. They could change their minds without changing their character. This is what growth actually looks like, not random change for its own sake, but intelligent adaptation in service of unchanging purposes. The tree doesn't compromise its nature by growing new branches. The river doesn't betray itself by finding new paths around obstacles. You are not diminished by learning. You're not weakened by adjusting. You're not less yourself because you incorporated new information. In fact, refusing to grow, that's when you start becoming less. That's when you trade your living, breathing identity for a static monument to who you used to be. And monuments, for all their grandeur, serve only one purpose: reminding the living of what's dead. So here's what I want you to ask yourself. Right now, today, what belief am I defending simply because I've held it for a long time? What method am I clinging to not because it's effective but because it's familiar? Where have I confused my commitment to a goal with attachment to a particular path? These aren't comfortable questions. But discomfort is often the admission price for wisdom. Because here's the truth we need to face. The world will move forward whether you move with it or not. Technology won't slow down because you find it intimidating. Markets won't pause because you're attached to how things used to be. Younger generations won't stop innovating because it makes you uncomfortable. You can choose to be a participant in your own future, or you can become a spectator, watching from the sidelines as life passes you by. I think about a conversation I had with a man in his late 70s. He told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Earl, I've learned that there are two ways to grow old. You can grow old and irrelevant, or you can grow old and interesting. The difference is simple. Interesting people never stop being curious. That's it. That's the secret that separates those who thrive in their later years from those who merely survive them. Curiosity is the antidote to obsolescence. When you remain curious, you remain engaged. When you remain engaged, you remain relevant, not just to the world around you, but to yourself, to your own sense of purpose and possibility. Think about the people you admire who've aged well, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. What do they have in common? They're interested. They ask questions. They want to understand. They're willing to admit what they don't know and eager to learn it. They haven't confused aging with stopping. Now, I want to be clear about something. Remaining relevant doesn't mean abandoning your values or pretending to be someone you're not. It doesn't mean adopting every trend or forcing yourself to like things that genuinely don't resonate with you. You don't have to love TikTok. You don't have to understand cryptocurrency. You don't have to agree with every social change happening around you. But you do have to remain willing to understand, to listen, to consider perspectives that differ from your own without immediately dismissing them as wrong or foolish. Because here's what happens when you close yourself off. You don't just stop learning about the world. You stop learning about yourself. You stop growing. And when you stop growing, something inside you begins to die, long before your body follows. I've watched it happen. I've seen vibrant, intelligent people slowly fade into shadows of themselves, not because their bodies failed them, but because they decided, consciously or unconsciously, that they'd learned enough, experienced enough, grown enough. They stopped asking, "What if?" and started saying, "I already know." And that, more than any physical decline, is what makes a person old. So what's the alternative? How do you stay relevant in a world that's changing faster than ever before? You start by accepting that relevance is not a destination, it's a practice. It's something you choose, day after day, sometimes moment by moment. It means staying in conversation with the world, reading, listening, observing, not just consuming information that confirms what you already believe, but actively seeking out ideas that challenge you. It means building bridges instead of walls, finding common ground with people younger than you, older than you, different from you, recognizing that wisdom flows in all directions, not just from older to younger. It means contributing, not just consuming. Sharing what you know, yes, but also creating space for others to share what they know. Mentoring without lecturing, guiding without controlling. And perhaps most importantly, it means staying useful. Finding ways to apply your experience and knowledge to solve real problems, address real needs, create real value in the lives of others. Because ultimately, relevance isn't about being noticed, it's about being needed. It's about having something genuine to offer to a world that's always hungry for wisdom, perspective, and authentic connection. The question isn't whether the world will change, it will. The question is whether you'll change with it, bringing your hard-won wisdom along as a gift rather than a burden.